I discovered my wife had been drugging me for years to make me seem mentally unstable. The morning I found the pill crusher hidden behind the flour container changed everything I thought I knew about my life. For 3 years, I had been convinced I was losing my mind, experiencing memory lapses, mood swings, and episodes of confusion that left me questioning my own sanity. My wife had been so supportive during these dark times, always encouraging me to rest, to take it easy, to let her handle the important decisions. She would make me breakfast every morning, always insisting on preparing my coffee herself because she knew exactly how I liked it. The way she would watch me drink it, with that concerned expression on her face, now made perfect sense in the most horrifying way possible. It started small, maybe 4 years ago, when I began having trouble concentrating during important meetings and forgetting conversations that I was certain had never happened. My wife would gently remind me of things I supposedly said or did, and I would feel this creeping sense of dread that maybe something was seriously wrong with me. She suggested I see someone about it, but every time I made an appointment, something would come up, or I would have a particularly bad episode that left me too exhausted to follow through. The pattern became so consistent that I started to believe I was genuinely unreliable, that my perception of reality couldn't be trusted. The episodes got worse over time, and I found myself becoming increasingly dependent on my wife for basic daily functions. She would help me remember appointments, manage our finances, and even started coming with me to social gatherings, because I was so worried about embarrassing myself. My friends began to notice the changes too, and I could see the concern in their eyes when I would struggle to follow conversations or seem confused about things that should have been obvious. The shame was overwhelming, and I started isolating myself more and more, which only made me more dependent on her support and guidance. What really broke me was when I started having what seemed like panic attacks during family gatherings. My heart would race, I would feel dizzy and disoriented, and sometimes I would even feel like I was having trouble breathing. My wife would immediately spring into action, helping me to a quiet room and staying with me until I felt better. She was always so caring and attentive during these moments, and I felt guilty for putting her through this stress. Everyone in our family praised her for being such a devoted partner, and I agreed completely, feeling lucky to have someone who stood by me during such a difficult time. The memory issues became so severe that I started keeping a journal, trying to track my symptoms and figure out if there was some pattern I was missing. But even that became frustrating because I would write things down and then later find entries that I had no memory of making. Sometimes the handwriting looked slightly different, or the details didn't match what I remembered about certain events. I started to wonder if I was having some kind of dissociative episodes, and the fear of that possibility made everything worse. My wife suggested we try different approaches to help with my condition, always being careful to frame it as something we were tackling together. She bought me supplements that were supposed to help with memory and focus, and she started preparing special meals that she said would support brain health. She was constantly researching new treatments online and would excitedly share articles she found about people who had overcome similar challenges. Her dedication to helping me get better was touching, and I felt even more guilty about being such a burden on her life. The financial strain became another source of stress, as my work performance had declined significantly due to my condition. I started making mistakes that I never would have made before, missing deadlines, and struggling to maintain the level of quality that had always been my strength. My wife was incredibly understanding about this too, suggesting that maybe I should consider taking some time off or even exploring disability options. She had started taking on more responsibilities around the house, and was even considering going back to work herself to help support us during this difficult period. One particularly bad week, I had 3 separate incidents where I couldn't remember important conversations or commitments, and I finally decided I needed to get serious about documenting everything. I started setting up a small camera in our kitchen to record my daily routines, thinking that if I could review the footage, I might be able to identify triggers or patterns that were contributing to my memory problems. I told my wife about this plan, and she seemed a bit hesitant but ultimately supportive, saying she just wanted me to be careful not to become too obsessed with monitoring myself. The breakthrough came completely by accident when I was looking for something in our kitchen pantry and knocked over the flour container. As I was cleaning up the mess, I noticed something metallic had fallen out from behind it, and when I picked it up, I realized it was a small pill crusher. At first, I thought maybe it was something my wife used for her own supplements, but something about finding it hidden there felt strange. I had never seen her use it, and when I asked her about it later, she seemed genuinely surprised and said she had no idea where it came from. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the pill crusher, and I started to wonder if there might be other things hidden around our kitchen that I wasn't aware of. I waited until my wife was asleep and then carefully searched through our cabinets, looking for anything that seemed out of place. Behind the spice rack, I found a small plastic bag with white powder residue, and in the back of the refrigerator, tucked behind some old condiments, there was a small vial with no label. The contents looked like some kind of clear liquid, and when I opened it, it had a slightly bitter smell that seemed familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. I realized I needed to be very careful about how I handled this discovery, because I still wasn't entirely sure what I was looking at. The next morning, I pretended everything was normal and let my wife make my coffee as usual. But instead of drinking it, I poured it into a travel mug and took it with me when I left the house. I found a place that could test the contents anonymously, and when I got the results back 2 days later, I felt like the ground had disappeared from under my feet. The coffee contained a significant amount of a sedative that would explain every single symptom I had been experiencing for the past 3 years. The confirmation that I had been systematically poisoned by someone I trusted completely was devastating in a way I couldn't have imagined. Everything I thought I knew about my reality had been carefully constructed to make me doubt my own perceptions and become dependent on her version of events. I realized that my wife had been documenting my confused and disoriented behavior to build a case for my instability, probably planning to use it for some kind of legal or financial advantage. The level of manipulation was so sophisticated that I had completely bought into the narrative that I was losing my mind. I knew I had to be strategic about how I confronted this situation, because my wife clearly had no qualms about harming me to achieve her goals. I started secretly recording our conversations and began refusing the coffee she made me, making excuses about trying to cut back on caffeine or wanting to drink more water. Within a few days, I noticed a significant improvement in my mental clarity and energy levels, which only confirmed what I already knew. My wife seemed to notice the change too, and started suggesting that maybe I should go back to drinking coffee since it might be part of my routine that was helping me feel better. Instead of confronting her directly, I decided to gather more evidence and figure out what her ultimate plan might be. I started paying closer attention to our financial situation and discovered that she had been slowly transferring money from our joint accounts into accounts that I didn't have access to. She had also been in contact with lawyers about getting power of attorney over my affairs, claiming that my mental state was deteriorating and that I needed someone to help manage my responsibilities. The scope of her deception was breathtaking and terrifying. The most disturbing part was realizing how many people in our circle had been influenced by her careful documentation of my supposed mental decline. She had been sharing her concerns about my condition with family members and friends, always in a way that made her seem like the devoted caregiver who was struggling to help me. When I started to recover and become more like my old self, some people commented on how much better I seemed, but others looked at me with concern, as if my apparent improvement was actually a sign that something was seriously wrong. I finally decided to take action when I discovered that my wife had been meeting with someone about having me involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility. She had been building a case with medical professionals, using the documentation of my episodes and her own testimony about my erratic behavior to convince them that I was a danger to myself. The timing made sense because once I was committed, she would have complete control over our assets and could probably access my insurance benefits as well. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday morning when I presented her with the evidence I had gathered, including the test results from the coffee and recordings of our conversations, where she had lied about various incidents. Her reaction was unlike anything I had ever seen from her before, transforming from the caring, concerned partner I thought I knew into someone cold and calculating. She didn't deny what she had done, but instead tried to justify it by claiming that I had been emotionally distant and that she deserved to be compensated for everything she had endured in our relationship. What happened next was the most chilling part of the entire experience, because she calmly explained that she had been planning this for years and that I would never be able to prove what she had done. She pointed out that everyone in our social circle already believed I was unstable, and that if I tried to accuse her of poisoning me, it would only reinforce their perception that I was paranoid and delusional. She had been so careful to establish the narrative of my mental decline that even the truth would sound like the ravings of someone who was clearly disturbed. I realized that I was in a situation where the very people who were supposed to protect me from harm had been conditioned to see me as the problem. My wife had spent years positioning herself as the long-suffering victim of my mental illness, and now she was confident that no one would believe my version of events. The manipulation had been so thorough that even I had started to doubt my own perceptions, and it would be difficult to convince others that what seemed like obvious evidence of my instability was actually the result of deliberate poisoning. The legal system turned out to be more complicated than I had expected, because proving that someone has been systematically drugging you requires a level of evidence that is difficult to obtain after the fact. Even though I had the test results from the coffee, my wife's legal team argued that I could have contaminated the sample myself as part of a paranoid delusion. They presented evidence of my documented mental health struggles over the past 3 years, including medical records from visits where I had reported memory problems and confusion. The turning point came when I was able to access security footage from our neighborhood that showed my wife meeting with someone who appeared to be providing her with the substances she had been using. The meetings had been happening regularly for months, always in locations where they thought they wouldn't be observed. This evidence, combined with the financial records showing her systematic transfer of assets and the communications with legal professionals about having me committed, finally provided the proof I needed. The aftermath of the discovery was almost as traumatic as the poisoning itself, because I had to come to terms with the fact that someone I had loved and trusted had been deliberately destroying my life for years. The realization that every moment of confusion, every episode of disorientation, and every doubt about my own sanity had been carefully orchestrated was devastating. I had lost years of my life to this deception, and the psychological impact of that level of betrayal was something I wasn't sure I would ever fully recover from. The most difficult part was rebuilding relationships with family and friends who had been convinced that I was genuinely unstable. Some people were able to accept the truth and were horrified by what had been done to me, but others remained skeptical, wondering if my accusations against my wife were actually evidence that I was still not thinking clearly. The damage to my reputation and relationships was something that would take years to repair, if it could be repaired at all. Looking back now, I can see the subtle signs that I missed or dismissed at the time, but I also understand why I didn't recognize what was happening. The manipulation was so gradual and sophisticated that it was designed to make me doubt my own perceptions, and my wife had been careful to maintain the appearance of being supportive and caring throughout the entire process. She had studied my patterns and vulnerabilities and used them against me in a way that was both brilliant and utterly ruthless. The legal proceedings took almost 2 years to resolve, and during that time, I had to rebuild my life from scratch while dealing with the ongoing stress of the case. I had to reestablish my professional reputation, repair relationships that had been damaged by years of seemingly erratic behavior, and work through the psychological trauma of having been systematically deceived by someone I trusted completely. The process was exhausting and often felt overwhelming, but it was also liberating to finally understand what had been happening to me. My wife was eventually convicted of assault and fraud, receiving a sentence that included both prison time and restitution for the financial damage she had caused. The conviction provided some sense of justice, but it couldn't undo the years of my life that had been stolen or repair all the relationships that had been damaged by her deception. The case also revealed that she had been involved in similar schemes with previous partners, suggesting that this was a pattern of behavior rather than an isolated incident. The experience fundamentally changed how I think about trust and relationships, making me more cautious about becoming vulnerable with others, but also more appreciative of genuine connections. I learned to pay attention to subtle signs of manipulation, and to trust my own perceptions even when others suggest that I might be wrong. The recovery process taught me that resilience isn't just about bouncing back from trauma, but about learning to rebuild your life in a way that honors your own truth and experience. Today, I'm in a much better place than I was during those dark years when I thought I was losing my mind. I've rebuilt my professional life, strengthened relationships with family and friends who stood by me, and developed new connections with people who understand the complex nature of psychological manipulation. The experience was devastating, but it also taught me valuable lessons about the importance of maintaining my own sense of reality and not allowing others to define my truth for me. The story serves as a reminder that sometimes the people closest to us are capable of the most profound betrayals, and that maintaining our own sense of reality requires constant vigilance and self-awareness. It also highlights the importance of having support systems that aren't controlled by any single person, and the need to trust our own instincts even when everyone around us suggests that we might be wrong. The human capacity for both cruelty and resilience continues to amaze me, and I'm grateful that I was able to discover the truth before it was too late to reclaim my life.